My wife texted, "We're done forever. All discussion via my legal team." I replied, loud and clear. Then I froze her bank access and stopped all monthly payments. 48 hours later, her legal team was desperately reaching me. I was standing on the 42nd floor of a high-rise construction site in downtown Seattle, reviewing foundation specifications with my crew, when my phone buzzed at 2:17 p.m. on what started as an ordinary Monday afternoon. Jessica's message appeared on my screen like a digital nuclear bomb. "Brandon, I'm filing for divorce. We're done forever. Do not contact me directly about anything. All future discussion goes through my legal team. My attorney is Marcus Davis at Davis & Associates. This marriage is officially over. Have your lawyer contact mine." I stared at those words for exactly 30 seconds while Seattle's skyline stretched endlessly beyond the concrete and steel skeleton we were building. 3 years of marriage, reduced to a cold, calculated text message that read like a corporate termination notice. No conversation, no attempt at counseling, no explanation beyond the clinical finality of legal threats. I typed back 5 words. "Message received." Loud and clear. Then I got to work. As a construction project manager who'd built his career on systematic planning and immediate problem solving, I understood that Jessica had just declared war using the nuclear option. She wanted everything routed through attorneys and treated like a hostile business transaction? Perfect. I could play that game better than she realized. By 5:30 p.m., I'd systematically dismantled our entire shared financial ecosystem with the precision of a demolition expert. First, I canceled her access to our business credit card account, the one linked to my construction company that she'd been using for her $800 monthly spa treatments and personal shopping expeditions. Next, I terminated the automatic transfer of her $4,200 monthly allowance, money I'd been depositing into her personal account every first of the month like clockwork for the past 2 years. Then came the luxury service subscriptions, her $350 monthly private gym membership, the $280 monthly beauty package at that exclusive salon in Bellevue, her $150 monthly subscription boxes filled with organic skincare products she'd order and forget about. Every recurring payment tied to my accounts got severed with clinical efficiency. I documented every cancellation with screenshots and timestamps, creating a paper trail that would make any attorney proud. When I arrived at our waterfront condo in Queen and at 7:45 p.m., the place looked like it had been professionally cleared by a moving company. Jessica had vanished along with her clothes, our expensive coffee machine, the living room art pieces worth over $3,000, and even the throw pillows I'd never cared about but apparently held significant value. She'd left behind only my belongings and a lingering scent of her vanilla perfume, like evidence of a ghost who'd decided to haunt someone else's house. The methodical nature of her departure told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a spontaneous decision driven by emotion or some sudden relationship crisis. Jessica had been planning this exit strategy for weeks, possibly months, with the calculated precision of a corporate merger. She'd consulted lawyers, researched her options, and chosen the most aggressive approach possible, complete communication cutoff paired with immediate asset protection. But she'd made one critical miscalculation. As someone who'd built a successful construction business from nothing, I understood logistics, cash flow, and financial pressure points better than most people. Jessica might have thought she was launching a surprise attack, but she'd actually just handed me the strategic advantage by declaring her intentions so clearly. I spent that evening contacting Rodriguez & Associates, the law firm that handled all my business legal matters, and explained the situation to Maria Rodriguez, my attorney for the past 5 years. "She wants everything through lawyers only?" Maria asked with barely concealed amusement. "That's going to get expensive fast, especially if she's planning to fight over assets." How much monthly support was she receiving? About $4,200 in direct payments, plus another $1,500 in various service subscriptions and credit card access. Maria whistled softly. "And now? As of today? Sir." She wanted legal communication only, so I'm honoring that request completely. Smart move, Brandon. Document everything you're doing and why. If she's playing hardball, we need to show you're responding appropriately to her demands, not retaliating emotionally. By midnight, I'd created a comprehensive spreadsheet detailing every financial modification I'd made, complete with timestamps, confirmation numbers, and the legal justification for each action. If Jessica wanted to treat our marriage dissolution like a business transaction, I'd give her the most professional, thoroughly documented business response she'd ever encountered. What she didn't realize was that cutting off communication meant cutting off her ability to negotiate or explain her position. She'd voluntarily surrendered the one thing that might have saved her from the financial reality she was about to discover, the power of direct conversation with the person who controlled her lifestyle funding. Exactly 48 hours after Jessica's digital declaration of war, my phone rang at 11:23 a.m. while I was reviewing blueprints for our new commercial project in Bellevue. The caller ID showed Davis and Associates, and I answered with professional curiosity about how quickly desperation could transform legal bravado into frantic damage control. Mr. Brandon Mitchell? This is Marcus Davis, Jessica Mitchell's attorney. We need to discuss the immediate restoration of my client's financial access. His voice carried the strained authority of someone trying to project confidence while scrambling to contain a crisis he hadn't anticipated. I leaned back in my office chair, genuinely interested in hearing how he'd frame this conversation. Mr. Davis, I believe my wife specifically requested that all communication go through legal representatives. I'm simply honoring that boundary she established. Yes, well, there seems to have been some misunderstanding. My client's credit cards were declined yesterday at an exclusive spa in Seattle, and her personal trainer refused service this morning due to unpaid fees. These disruptions are causing significant hardship. The barely concealed panic in his voice told me everything I needed to know. Jessica had probably spent the last 2 days discovering exactly how much her lifestyle depended on my financial infrastructure, and now her attorney was fielding desperate calls about declined payments and service cancellations. I'm sorry to hear about those inconveniences, but I'm not sure how that relates to me. Shouldn't your client be handling her own financial obligations? Mr. Mitchell, you're well aware that married couples have legal obligations regarding spousal support under Washington state marital property laws. The sudden termination of established financial support could be construed as economic coercion. There it was, the legal threat wrapped in formal language, exactly what I'd expected from someone trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond their expectations. But Marcus Davis had made the same miscalculation as Jessica, assuming that aggressive legal posturing would intimidate me into compliance. That's an interesting interpretation, Mr. Davis. However, I'm not comfortable discussing legal matters without my own representation present. I'll have my attorney contact you directly to address any concerns. Your attorney? Who's representing you in this matter? Caldwell and Partners. The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds, long enough for Marcus Davis to recognize that name and understand its implications. Caldwell and Partners was Seattle's most ruthless divorce litigation firm, the legal equivalent of bringing a tank to a knife fight. They specialized in high-asset divorces where one party tried to play hardball and ended up learning expensive lessons about overestimating their leverage. Mr. Mitchell, perhaps we can resolve this more amicably. Surely there's no need to involve Caldwell's office in what should be a straightforward discussion about temporary support arrangements. The shift in his tone was remarkable, from aggressive demands to diplomatic negotiation in the span of a single firm name. I thought my wife preferred formal legal channels for all communication. I'm simply respecting her clearly stated wishes by ensuring proper representation. What I mean is, couldn't we perhaps arrange a temporary agreement while the attorneys work out the larger details? Something to address my client's immediate needs. Mr. Davis, I'm not qualified to make legal decisions without proper counsel. I'm sure you understand the importance of following established procedures, especially given your client's explicit instructions about communication protocols. The conversation ended with Marcus Davis promising his attorney would call by end of business, his voice carrying resignation that barely masked growing anxiety. Jessica's strategy of legal intimidation had lasted exactly 48 hours before crashing into the reality of financial dependence, and her attorney had gone from making demands to essentially begging for cooperation. By Thursday morning of the first week, Jessica's support network had mobilized into damage control mode, and her best friend Maya decided to take matters into her own hands with a confrontation that revealed far more than she intended. I was grabbing my usual coffee at the Starbucks near my construction site when Maya approached my table with the righteous fury of someone who'd been fed a carefully curated version of recent events. "Brandon, what the hell is wrong with you? Jessica is staying at my place in Bellevue, crying every night because you're financially abusing her. She can't even buy groceries without having panic attacks about money. Maya's voice carried that particular blend of moral outrage and protective friendship that made it clear she genuinely believed she was confronting a villain. I set down my coffee and looked at her calmly, curious about how much of Jessica's story matched reality. I'm sorry to hear Jessica's having a difficult time. Financial transitions can be stressful for anyone. Financial transitions? You cut off all her access to money overnight without any warning. That's not a transition, that's economic warfare. The irony of Maya describing my response as warfare, when Jessica had literally declared our marriage over via text and demanded all communication go through attorneys, wasn't lost on me. But I maintained my composure and stuck to the facts. Maya, Jessica explicitly stated that all communication should go through legal representatives. I'm simply respecting that boundary while my attorney handles the proper procedures for spousal support. She didn't mean you should leave her completely broke and humiliated. Her trainer canceled their sessions, her spa membership got revoked, and she had to put back $300 worth of groceries at Whole Foods because her card was declined. The picture Maya painted was designed to make me feel guilty, but it actually reinforced something I'd suspected. Jessica had been living so far above her actual means that she couldn't even handle basic expenses without my financial support. Someone making $65,000 a year in marketing shouldn't need help buying groceries unless they'd become completely dependent on someone else funding their lifestyle. That does sound difficult, I acknowledged. I hope she's able to work out a sustainable budget that matches her income. Maya's expression shifted from righteous anger to something closer to confusion, probably because my response didn't match the heartless monster narrative she'd been expecting to encounter. Look, Brandon, I know you're hurt about the divorce, but this isn't the way to handle it. Jessica said she consulted with 3 different attorneys before choosing Mr. Davis, so she obviously tried to find the most reasonable approach. And there it was, the inadvertent revelation that completely contradicted Jessica's narrative about this being a sudden decision driven by relationship problems. Maya had just confirmed that Jessica had been shopping for divorce attorneys, comparing options, and strategically planning this exit for weeks or possibly months. The consultation process with multiple law firms indicated premeditated strategy, not emotional breakdown. 3 different attorneys? I asked casually, as if this was merely curious detail rather than crucial intelligence. Yeah, she wanted to make sure she found someone who understood her situation and could protect her interests. Mr. Davis seemed like the most experienced with complex asset cases. Complex asset cases. Jessica had been researching lawyers who specialized in high-value divorces, which meant she'd been calculating exactly how much she could extract from our marriage dissolution. This wasn't about relationship problems or incompatibility, this was about financial strategy and asset acquisition. Our conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which Maya inadvertently revealed several more crucial details. Jessica had been planning this divorce since at least February. She'd already moved most of her valuable belongings out of our condo over the past month, and she'd been telling people that our marriage had been financially one-sided for over a year. Each revelation confirmed that Jessica's departure had nothing to do with sudden relationship crisis and everything to do with calculated financial extraction. That afternoon, I discovered just how calculated when I received an automated alert from our joint savings account, the one I'd forgotten about because we rarely used it. Jessica had attempted to withdraw the entire $18,500 balance that morning, but the transaction had been flagged by the bank's security protocols because it represented an unusual activity pattern. When I called the bank to inquire, they explained that large withdrawals from dormant accounts triggered automatic holds, especially when attempted by someone who hadn't accessed the account in over 6 months. Jessica had tried to clean out our joint account the same day she'd sent her divorce text, but had been thwarted by banking security measures. I immediately contacted the bank to place a freeze on all joint accounts pending legal resolution, then called my attorney to report the attempted unauthorized withdrawal. This is exactly the kind of behavior that strengthens your position, Maria Rodriguez explained during our call. Attempting to drain joint accounts during divorce proceedings looks very bad to judges, especially when combined with her aggressive communication strategy. By Friday afternoon, Marcus Davis had filed emergency motions requesting $9,500 monthly temporary spousal support, exclusive occupancy of our waterfront condo, and continued access to our boat, which Jessica had apparently been telling people she considered community property despite the title being in my business name. The emergency hearing took place the following Tuesday in Judge Patricia Thompson's courtroom, and watching Jessica's carefully constructed narrative collapse under legal scrutiny was more satisfying than any construction project I'd ever completed on schedule and under budget. Jessica sat beside Marcus Davis wearing what was clearly a strategically chosen outfit, conservative dress, minimal makeup, the kind of understated appearance designed to project vulnerability rather than the high-maintenance lifestyle she'd been living on my dime. Judge Thompson, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd apparently seen every manipulation tactic in the divorce playbook, reviewed the emergency motions with methodical attention to detail. Mr. Davis, your client is requesting $9,500 monthly in temporary support. Can you provide documentation justifying this amount based on established living expenses? Marcus Davis launched into a prepared presentation about Jessica's reasonable lifestyle expectations and established standard of living, citing her spa memberships, personal training sessions, organic grocery requirements, and various subscription services as necessities rather than luxuries. The problem was that he'd essentially presented evidence of exactly the kind of excessive spending that judges typically view as irresponsible financial management. Your Honor, Maria Rodriguez interjected when Davis finished. We'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Mitchell attempted to withdraw $18,500 from joint savings accounts on the same day she filed for divorce, and that she consulted with multiple attorneys before choosing the most expensive option, suggesting premeditated financial strategy rather than sudden marital crisis. The expression on Jessica's face when Maria produced bank records of the attempted withdrawal was absolutely priceless. She'd clearly not expected her asset-grabbing attempt to become evidence against her, and Marcus Davis looked like someone who just realized his client had been less than forthcoming about her actions. Judge Thompson examined the bank documentation with obvious interest. Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain why you attempted to withdraw the entire balance from joint savings on the same day you initiated divorce proceedings? Jessica's response was exactly what I'd expected, a stammering explanation about securing funds for legal fees and protecting herself financially that only served to highlight the calculated nature of her actions. Her voice carried that particular tremor of someone who'd been caught in behavior they couldn't adequately justify. Judge Thompson spent 15 minutes reviewing financial documents, Jessica's employment records, and the timeline of events before delivering her ruling. I'm awarding temporary spousal support in the amount of $2,800 monthly, significantly less than requested, based on Mrs. Mitchell's demonstrated earning capacity and the evidence of attempted asset concealment. The request for exclusive occupancy of the marital residence is denied, as is the request for continued access to assets titled in Mr. Mitchell's business name. Jessica's face went through several distinct phases: shock, anger, desperation, and finally something that looked like panic as she realized her aggressive legal strategy had backfired spectacularly. She demanded $9,500 monthly and received less than a third of that amount, while also being denied access to the condo and boat she'd been counting on. But Jessica's courtroom defeat was apparently just the beginning of her retaliation campaign. Within a week of the hearing, I started receiving evidence that she'd decided to escalate from legal warfare to personal attack. First came an anonymous report to the Washington State Construction Licensing Board, claiming I'd been cutting safety corners on my job sites and using substandard materials to maximize profits. The complaint was detailed enough to trigger a formal investigation, complete with unscheduled site inspections and documentation reviews that cost me 3 days of productivity. The accusations were thoroughly debunked when investigators found my safety records were actually above industry standards, but the harassment served its purpose of creating professional disruption. Next came a series of malicious online reviews targeting my construction business, all posted from obviously fake accounts with names like Concerned Homeowner 2023 and Seattle Resident, claiming I'd provided poor workmanship, missed deadlines, and overcharged for services. The reviews were clearly written by someone familiar with my business operations, referencing specific projects and using insider knowledge to make the accusations sound credible to potential clients. The most brazen escalation came when Jessica's father, Richard, showed up at my office building on Friday afternoon, apparently intending to create a scene that would embarrass me professionally in front of colleagues and clients. Richard was a retired Boeing executive who'd always treated me with barely concealed disdain, viewing me as an inadequate provider for his daughter's expensive tastes and social ambitions. "You think you can destroy my daughter's life and get away with it?" he shouted in the lobby of my office building, his voice echoing through the marble atrium where other businesses conducted their activities. "Jessica gave you 3 years of her life, and you repaid her by cutting her off without warning like some kind of financial dictator." The irony of being called a financial dictator by the father of someone who'd attempted to drain our joint savings account wasn't lost on me, but I maintained professional composure while building security handled the situation. Instead of retaliating with equal drama, I took a methodical approach. I hired a cybersecurity specialist to trace the fake online reviews back to their sources, engaged a private investigator to document the escalating harassment campaign, and prepared comprehensive evidence packages that would demonstrate a pattern of coordinated intimidation tactics designed to damage my business and personal reputation. 2 weeks after the harassment campaign began, I decided it was time to go on the offensive with the same systematic approach I'd used to build my construction business from a one-man operation into a respected firm. The first target was our boat, a 32-foot cabin cruiser that Jessica had been using as her personal watercraft despite having no legal claim to ownership. I'd bought the boat 2 years before we met, and the title remained exclusively in my business name, making her continued use of it essentially theft of company property. I sent a formal notice through my attorney demanding Jessica return the boat within 14 days or face charges for unauthorized use of business assets. Her response came not through legal channels, but via a panicked phone call from Maya, who'd apparently been designated as Jessica's unofficial spokesperson for matters too desperate for lawyer involvement. "Brandon, you can't be serious about the boat. Jessica doesn't even have a car right now since her lease got repossessed. How is she supposed to get around?" Maya's voice carried the strained patience of someone who'd been dealing with Jessica's escalating financial crisis and was starting to understand the full scope of her friend's previous dependence on my income. I found it interesting that Jessica was now using Maya as an intermediary, essentially admitting that her own lawyer's only communication strategy had become a liability she couldn't afford to maintain. "The boat belongs to my business, Maya. Jessica has no legal right to use company property, especially not when she's simultaneously filing harassment reports against that same company." Meanwhile, my private investigator had uncovered information that revealed the true extent of Jessica's financial deception during our marriage. The investigation discovered that Jessica maintained a secret stock portfolio worth approximately $38,000, money she'd accumulated by claiming poverty while I covered all her expenses. She'd been systematically investing portions of the allowance money I'd given her while simultaneously claiming she was financially dependent and couldn't afford to contribute to household expenses. Even more revealing was the discovery of a safety deposit box she'd opened 6 months before filing for divorce, containing valuable jewelry she'd purchased during our marriage but hidden from asset disclosure requirements. The jewelry included pieces worth over $12,000 that she'd bought using credit cards I'd been paying off, then stashed away as if they didn't exist for legal purposes. The pattern was clear. Jessica had been preparing for divorce by concealing assets while maximizing her claims of financial dependency and need for support. But the most dramatic confrontation came when Jessica violated her own lawyer's only communication rule by showing up at my construction site on a Thursday morning, apparently believing she could manipulate me more effectively through direct emotional appeal than through legal channels. My crew was pouring concrete for a foundation when she arrived in an Uber, looking desperate and disheveled in a way that suggested her carefully maintained appearance was another casualty of her reduced financial circumstances. "Brandon, we need to talk," she announced, her voice carrying that particular combination of desperation and entitlement that had become her signature tone. "This has gone too far. I never wanted things to get this ugly between us." My workers stopped what they were doing, obviously curious about the personal drama unfolding at their professional worksite. I motioned for them to continue working while I addressed Jessica's unexpected appearance, acutely aware that anything I said would become workplace gossip and potentially legal evidence. "Jessica, you specifically requested that all communication go through attorneys. I'm not comfortable having this conversation without proper representation. Forget the lawyers for a minute. This is about us, about 3 years of marriage that meant something. You're trying to destroy me financially, and I don't understand why you're being so cruel." The accusation of cruelty was remarkable coming from someone who'd spent weeks filing false reports against my business, posting fake reviews to damage my reputation, and sending her father to create scenes at my workplace. But what struck me most was her apparent genuine shock that I wasn't willing to continue funding her lifestyle after she declared war on our marriage. Jessica, you chose the attorney's only approach. You chose to try to drain our joint accounts. You chose to file false reports against my business. These weren't relationship problems, they were strategic attacks designed to damage me personally and professionally. I documented the entire encounter with my phone, recording both her violation of the communication protocols she demanded and her admission that the harassment campaign had been coordinated rather than coincidental. The footage would serve as evidence that Jessica's legal strategy was inconsistent and opportunistic, shifting between aggressive legal tactics and personal emotional manipulation depending on which approach seemed more likely to produce financial results. What followed was 6 months of the most expensive legal education Jessica would ever receive, as her family's financial resources got steadily consumed by a war of attrition she couldn't afford to win. Marcus Davis had apparently convinced Jessica and her parents that aggressive litigation tactics would force me into a settlement, but every frivolous motion and delay tactic only increased their legal bills while my construction business continued expanding into lucrative commercial projects. The boat situation became a perfect example of Jessica's deteriorating position when she failed multiple credit checks required for ownership transfer, essentially proving she had no financial capacity to maintain the asset she was demanding. Without access to transportation, she became dependent on rideshare services and Maya's increasingly reluctant assistance, creating tension in her primary support relationship. Maya had initially been sympathetic to Jessica's financial crisis, but 6 months of covering extra expenses and dealing with Jessica's emotional volatility had clearly strained their friendship to the breaking point. Jessica's attempts to establish independent housing also collapsed when her credit applications were rejected due to insufficient income and outstanding debts. She'd been living in Maya's Bellevue apartment on what was supposed to be a temporary basis, but her inability to secure her own lease meant the arrangement had become indefinitely extended. Maya's patience with this situation became apparent during a conversation I overheard at a coffee shop, where she was telling another friend that Jessica refuses to accept reality about her financial situation and keeps expecting other people to solve problems she created for herself. The asset discovery process revealed even more evidence of Jessica's systematic deception during our marriage. In addition to the secret stock portfolio and hidden jewelry, investigators found expensive furniture she'd moved to her parents' storage unit, including pieces worth over $8,000 that she'd purchased with credit cards I was paying off while claiming she couldn't afford to contribute to household expenses. She'd also concealed a $25,000 inheritance from her aunt that she'd received 8 months before filing for divorce, money she'd immediately moved into accounts controlled by her parents to avoid asset disclosure requirements. Judge Thompson was clearly losing patience with Jessica's obstructionist tactics and delay strategies during our monthly status conferences. When Marcus Davis filed his 14th motion for continuance, citing his client's need for additional time to gather financial documentation, the judge threatened contempt charges if Jessica continued what appeared to be deliberate non-cooperation with court-ordered discovery processes. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Thompson said during our December hearing, "This court has been more than accommodating with your requests for additional time, but your pattern of incomplete disclosure and last-minute document production suggests intentional obstruction rather than good faith compliance. I'm setting a firm trial date for March 15th, and there will be no further continuances regardless of the circumstances." Jessica's face during that hearing showed someone who'd finally realized that her legal strategy wasn't working and that she was facing the possibility of a trial she couldn't afford to lose. Her parents had already spent over $35,000 on legal fees, money that could have been used for Jessica's housing and basic living expenses instead of funding a war she'd been losing from the beginning. The final blow to Jessica's position came when my attorney filed countermotions seeking reimbursement for my legal costs due to Jessica's frivolous litigation tactics and asset concealment. Under Washington state law, courts can order the financially irresponsible party to cover both sides' legal expenses when their conduct has unnecessarily prolonged proceedings and increased costs. Marcus Davis found himself in the uncomfortable position of explaining to his clients that continuing their aggressive litigation strategy might result in them paying my legal bills on top of their own, potentially doubling their financial exposure in a case they were already losing. By February, Jessica's situation had deteriorated to the point where she was working retail for the first time since college, taking a part-time position at a Nordstrom department store that paid $18 per hour and required her to stand for 8-hour shifts helping customers afford the kind of luxury items she could no longer purchase for herself. The irony of Jessica's employment situation wasn't lost on anyone who knew the full story. She was now earning less per day than she used to spend on single spa treatments, serving customers who could afford the lifestyle she'd lost when she decided to declare war on our marriage. By March, Jessica's legal position had become completely untenable, and even Marcus Davis was recommending settlement rather than proceeding to trial. The prospect of facing Judge Thompson's final ruling terrified Jessica's family, who'd already invested over $52,000 in legal fees for a strategy that had systematically backfired. The final settlement gave me 70% of all marital assets due to Jessica's proven asset concealment and litigation misconduct, while she received minimal 18-month rehabilitative alimony of $1,600 monthly. She was also required to return the hidden furniture from her parents' storage unit and cover her own legal bills. Judge Thompson's final comments were particularly satisfying. This case serves as an excellent example of why aggressive litigation tactics typically backfire when dealing with methodical, well-documented opposition. Ms. Mitchell chose to escalate rather than negotiate, and the financial consequences are entirely appropriate. Jessica's face during that hearing showed someone who'd finally understood that her strategic miscalculations had cost her far more than simply agreeing to reasonable terms 10 months earlier would have. Instead of the $9,500 monthly support she'd originally demanded, she was receiving $1,600. Instead of getting exclusive access to our condo and boat, she was moving to a studio apartment. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Maya at a farmer's market, and her update on Jessica's situation was both predictable and satisfying. Jessica had been fired from Nordstrom for attitude problems, was struggling to make rent, and had been forced to move back in with her parents. She keeps saying the whole thing was her mother's idea, Maya told me with obvious frustration. Apparently Patricia convinced Jessica that you weren't good enough for their family and that the divorce was an opportunity to upgrade her circumstances. But now Patricia won't take responsibility for how badly the whole strategy backfired. The revelation that Jessica's entire divorce approach had been orchestrated by her controlling mother Patricia, who'd viewed me as socially inferior and saw the divorce as a financial opportunity, explained everything about the calculated aggression that had characterized Jessica's legal strategy. Patricia had catastrophically underestimated my business acumen and methodical approach to problem solving. Today, I'm engaged to Sarah, an architect who works on commercial projects and genuinely appreciates both my profession and my systematic approach to planning. She contributes equally to our shared expenses and future goals, and we're building something together based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Jessica, according to the last update I received, is working at a coffee shop and living with her parents while trying to rebuild credit that was destroyed by her expensive legal miscalculations. The woman who once demanded $9,500 monthly in support is now making $12 per hour and learning that declaring war on someone who controls your lifestyle funding rarely ends the way you expect it to.